this guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The honourable member from Regina, Capel.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister's economic vandalism, over 2 million Canadians are visiting a food bank in a single month. Housing costs have doubled, and inflation continues to eat away at Canadians' paychecks. His massive deficits and tax hikes are causing extreme damage to the Canadian economy. For 8 out of the last 9 quarters, Canadian per-person GDP is down. This is a made-in-Canada per-person GDP recession. That means Canadian workers work harder but bring home less. So will the Prime Minister stop his economic vandalism and cancel his job-killing, paycheck-shrinking tax hikes?
Yes.
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we heard the sad news of the passing of the Honourable Murray Sinclair. Let me take a moment before we begin today to say a few words about him. As a former judge, senator, and chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Murray was determined to help Canada reckon with its colonial realities and bring healing to this country. He was a visionary and a leader, and his kind and fierce commitment to truth has pushed Canada forward in profound and lasting ways. Our hearts and minds are with his family, and Canada is a much better place for his service.
The Honourable Member from Regina, Capel.
I join in my honourable colleagues' sending of condolences, but we are witnessing economic vandalism in real time. Last Thursday, this government was briefed that the only sector of the Canadian economy actually producing any growth was the energy sector. And what did they do today? They slapped a punishing cap on Canadian production.
Exactly.
All this will do is chase investments and jobs to other countries. But that's something this Prime Minister is good at. He's increased Canadian investment into the U.S. by $63 billion last year alone. So will the Prime Minister stop fueling the U.S. economy, cancel his tax hikes, and cancel the production cap to bring those investment dollars back home?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we were very pleased to announce an emissions cap with respect to the oil and gas sector in this country. Given that oil and gas constitutes 31% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, it is important that we work with the sector to reduce emissions, just as we do with every sector. It is also true that as we move towards a lower carbon economy across the world, oil and gas produced with the lowest emissions is actually going to have value around the world. We are moving forward with a plan to address climate change and build a strong economy going forward. They are stuck in the past and ignoring the science of climate.
Before I get to the Honourable Member, I'm just going to ask the Honourable Member from Calgary Centre, please, to hold on until his question is turn to ask a question. The Honourable Member from Regina, Capel.
All this production cap will do is make other countries richer while making Canadians poorer. Exactly. But that's something this Prime Minister is so good at. Consider this. GDP per capita in Canada, down. In the U.S., it's up. 9 years ago, average wages in the U.S. and Canada were almost identical. Now, an American worker brings home $22,000 more than their Canadian counterpart. And $500 billion in investments has fled Canada to the United States, creating bigger paychecks for American workers, all because of this Prime Minister's high taxes and massive deficits. The Prime Minister is the #1 job creator in the United States. So instead of helping the Canadian economy, why not fight for Canada for once?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the member opposite should take the time to actually read the information about the pollution cap. Production is forecast to increase 16% by 2030, Mr. Speaker. So this idea that we're somehow cutting production is simply not true.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, almost 50% of young Canadians believe they will never own a home. This Liberal housing accelerator is an absolute joke. Common sense Conservatives have a plan. They're going to axe the GST on new home builds. On an $800,000 house, this will save $40,000. Wow. And the Conservative leader has now written to the premiers of every province asking them to match this tax cut. When will these NDP Liberals finally get it through their heads? They're funding bureaucracies, axe the tax on new builds so young people can buy a house.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
He says the Housing Accelerator Fund is a joke, Mr. Speaker. Has he consulted with his caucus? A dozen, probably more, Conservative members have advocated specifically for that program. They went behind the back of the Leader of the Opposition because they wanted to advocate for their constituents to see more homes built. By calling for the end of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is how they would pay for this new bold idea, so-called, they would end support to communities for homelessness, they would end support for more building for middle-class Canadians. Mr. Speaker, it's an unacceptable, untenable position.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Oh man, here's what Liberal housing advisor Mike P. Moffat said about the Liberal Housing Accelerator. Can anyone in the federal government tell me why Toronto deserves $471 million in housing accelerator funds to massively hike development taxes? And housing starts in Toronto are down 20%. Even Liberal advisors know the housing accelerator's a joke. Will these NDP Liberals finally realize they're funding bureaucracies, tripling development charges, and not getting any houses built for young Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Young Canadians, he talks about home building in Canada, Mr. Speaker. They have 6 homes to point to when they were in office. Wow. That's the sum total of their work when they were in office, when the Leader of the Opposition held the so-called role of Minister of Housing. He wasn't a minister at all, Mr. Speaker. In fact, if you look at the 190,000 number that they talk about during their time in office, that was home builders who did that, Mr. Speaker. It was not them. They know nothing about getting homes built. They know only about cuts. They would only make cuts to communities. It's not an acceptable position, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, Canada has become the caboose to America's high-flying economic engine. The GDP per capita has become so stark that the average American worker is now making $22,000 more than the Canadian worker. Why? Well, because Americans don't pay a carbon tax. They don't have high fly-raising capital gains taxes. And they don't have soft trade policies. So when will this Prime Minister finally admit that his high taxes, soft trade policies have derailed Canadian prosperity, or is he content in keeping Canadian workers riding in the back in the caboose?
Good question. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives may have an inferiority complex vis-a-vis the United States, but I sure don't. Let me tell you what's better in Canada. Inflation is lower. Interest rates are lower. We live 4 years longer because we have a universal single-payer healthcare system. And you know what? Investors are noticing the Canadian advantage. Here's what David Rosenberg said last week. U.S.-based investors should strongly consider moving from New York to Toronto because returns here are better too.
The Honourable Member from Bay of Quinte.
Amazing, Mr. Speaker, because the Liberal candidate Mark Carney moved his company to New York. But let me tell you what's actually happening in the Canadian economy. 90,000 jobs have been lost since 2015 in the softwood lumber industry. 90,000 jobs, 40,000 of them in BC alone. The last Prime Minister figured the softwood lumber deal in 79 days. It's been 9 years and 3 U.S. presidents. How many jobs have to be chopped before this Prime Minister figures out that high taxes and a weak, soft spine won't bring jobs back and paychecks to Canadians and across the softwood lumber industry?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from these weak Conservatives when it comes to standing up for the Canadian national interest. And that's because we remember the 232 steel and aluminum interests that the U.S. imposed on us. And when we did that, we retaliated. We had the guts to do that. And you know what the Conservatives said? They urged us to back down. They said that retaliation was dumb. They would sell Canadian interests out again in a minute. We will never do that.
Order. The Honourable Member from Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Moose Jaw's Food Bank faced a temporary closure due to rising costs of food and lack of donations this summer. It used to be people facing temporary hardship were the ones that used the food bank. Now, it's people with good jobs being forced to use the food bank because the cost of everything has gone up. Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so people can put something under the tree and on their table this Christmas?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Well, I'm glad to hear the member opposite use the word security again. You know, what this House should be preoccupied with, and that all Canadians are preoccupied with is the overwhelming question that they can't answer as to why the Conservative leader will not get his security clearance. It's been months and months and months. This House has been preoccupied with foreign interference, and yet the Conservative leader won't step up and do the very basic thing that all other party leaders in this House have done, which is to get a security clearance and protect the country.
Yeah.
The Honourable Member from Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our kids need help. The internet is not a safe place for them right now. We need to hold online platforms accountable and put the safety of our children first by passing the Online Harms Act. Unfortunately, we can't debate this bill because all business in the House is stalled in a Conservative delay tactic. Amanda Todd's mother, Carol, one of my constituents, recently spoke to the Globe and Mail calling for us to debate and pass Bill C-63. Can the Minister of Justice and Attorney General explain why parents across the country, including Carol, are urging us to pass the online...
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Carol Todd for her courage. Carol's daughter, Amanda, tragically died by suicide 12 years ago after being victimized online. Now Carol is calling on every parliamentarian to take action and pass the Online Harms Act. To quote Carol, she said, "The filibuster that is happening right now and holding everything up is frustrating. It's just wasting time. I've waited 12 years for this. Conservatives have shown they will not prioritize children or protecting them. But I put it to the Bloc and the NDP that they have the power right now to stop this filibuster, protect kids, and pass this bill. Will they?"
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Two hardened criminals, a stolen car, and a police chase. It's not the plot of a blockbuster movie, it's daily life in Canada after 9 years of this Prime Minister. This weekend, the Toronto police officers tried to arrest two car thieves. But not before the crooks injured a horse, rammed a bunch of vehicles, destroyed a business, and put innocent shoppers in danger. We know that both offenders were out on bail thanks to the Liberal NDP catch and release policy that has made this country more dangerous for victims and more lenient for criminals. So why was this government putting police and the public at risk instead of putting criminals in jail where they belong?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
That member talks a big game, but when it comes to GTA politics, let's actually assess what police officers are saying. The Deputy Chief of Police in York Region has said, if you actually want to get tough on bail, you need to support the courts, the Crowns, and fix the detention centres. Guess who has jurisdiction over all of that? The member from Thornhill should know that's the province. You want to get tough on dealing with bail? Let's have the province support criminal justice in this country and keep our communities safe.
No, members are very passionate about many issues. I'm going to ask the member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, as well as the member from Sarnia-Lambton, please, not to take the mic unless recognised by the chair. The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
That answer is offensive to every single police officer who puts their life on the line and offensive to every single Canadian who has been a victim of violent crime. Last year, 8 police officers were killed in just 7 months, and violent crime has gone up 30%. Scenes like the one from downtown Toronto are no longer extraordinary. They are becoming the norm under his watch. Provincial governments, municipalities, police associations said they all want change, but the minister responds with that, whatever that was. His recklessness is turning criminals out onto the streets and putting the public at risk. Why is he the only one that doesn't see it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Let's listen to police officers. Here's the Deputy Chief of York Region. There's just not simply enough court space to hold contested bail hearings. Let's listen to the National Police Federation, who pointed out, newsflash, that when you have JPs with no legal training, sometimes there may be some issues with their rendering of decisions and keeping our community safe. Where do they train JPs legally before they appoint them? Nova Scotia. Maybe that's a lesson that Doug Ford could take. If she needs it in a three-word slogan, here it is. Talk to the Premier.